Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Headlines and the Most Censored News. I'm Lee Camp, one of the most censored comedians in America. I'll be joined in a moment by maybe the second or third or something most censored comedian in America, Katie Halper. Thank you again for joining these. I've been doing this interview series for just a short period of time, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in and enjoying them. I've talked to Chris Hedges and Scott Ritter and Stephen Donziger and Richard Wolf and a bunch of awesome people. And it continues today with an old friend of mine. We were doing comedy together in the early days in New York City. And, I've gotten to see all the amazing projects she's done over the years. But she is the co-host of Useful Idiots and the host of the Katie Halper Show. Please welcome Katie Halper. Hey, Katie.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, of course. It's a great time of the year to be taking time off.
Is this count as time off?
No, actually it doesn't. I don't know why I said that. Because I'm sure the same goes for you, that you keep doing your shows, right? Even when it's vacation time or holiday time. Yeah.
I skipped like one or two, yeah. almost like a normal human being for a moment.
Right. Good on you.
So, we'll just start off with, are you sad to see 2022 go?
Well, no, I'm not sad to see 2022 go. Although I'm not sure if I'm excited about 2023. I guess I should look at it more as a glass half full than empty. But no, 2022, I feel like it's been rough since 2020, honestly.
Yeah, well, I feel like a lot of things have been rough since the 1980s.
Oh, well, that too. Yeah, Reaganomics were quite a challenge. Yeah.
But I want to, I think a lot of people have probably heard a little snippet of it, but maybe haven't heard the full story from you. And so I want to go through, what happened to you. I guess it was a couple of months ago now, that you were, you and I have something else in common other than starting comedy around the same time in New York City in many ways, but and working together on various shows. But we now both have had shows deleted for the truths we tell, and banned or canceled. And I'd love for you to tell people your experience.
Sure. Yeah. So in my case, the show that I was on has not been banned. In my case, the show just banned me. So I used to be a weekly contributor to Rising on the Hill. So I would, for basically over the course of the last 3 years, I would come on every week, once a week, and I would be a guest, and I would, talk about a story that I found interesting or important, and hopefully make it a little funny at the same time. And then I was doing some guest hosting. And when you host, which is a paid position, when you host, you do these things called radars, and radars are basically monologues straight to the camera. And, you may have seen, if you watch Rising at the Hill, you may see people say, "What's on your radar?" And then you launch into the radar. And I decided for my radar, I'd hosted a couple times before, but this was my first radar. I decided I would do it about Rashida Tlaib getting in trouble over saying some things about Israel and Palestine. She said that it was becoming harder and harder for progressives to be progressive except for on Palestine, which there's a term for that, by the way. It's called the PEP, progressive except on Palestine. She didn't say that, but just so you know, that it is a thing.
Yeah. I remember you doing that joke back in the day.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was one of the ones where the crowd might turn on you.
But. Yeah, and they did a couple times. But I mean, I didn't make up that expression. It does exist. But she said that, and then she said that, you can't be a progressive and support the apartheid government of Israel. And people were, of course, extremely upset about it. You had Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. He lied about it. He said that Rashida Tlaib was imposing a litmus test for American Jews. She didn't mention American Jews, so not surprisingly, just more blatant dishonesty, rank dishonesty from Jonathan Greenblatt. Jake Tapper, who has a habit of kind of picking on Rashida Tlaib, did a little segment on it on CNN. He featured the indignant tweets from people like obviously Jonathan Greenblatt, who denied that Israel had an apartheid government. Also tweets from Jerry Nadler, Congressman Jerry Nadler, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who called it an outrage. So I decided I would do a video monologue about the state of Israel and the government of Israel and how it is actually an apartheid government. And I built the case by citing the United Nations, citing international law, because apartheid, of course, was a system that occurred in South Africa, but then it was turned into an international crime, very defined international crime.
Yeah, and the segment is excellent. And just to be clear, I know you and I are both comedians, but we also do a lot of serious stuff. It's not like you told jokes that people found offensive. It was a very straightforward, well-researched piece.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I cited what else? I cited, what was fascinating is that I actually cited some actual Israeli politicians and ministers, including actual prime ministers, all the ones I cited, said that either Israel was an apartheid state or was going to be an apartheid state. I also cited South Africans like Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, and I cited a current minister, Nelly Pandor, who's a current South African minister, who also just at the UN General Assembly mentioned Israel being seen as an apartheid state. And I cited human rights organizations ranging from Amnesty International to Human Rights Watch to, of course, several Palestinian human rights organizations, and B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization. So when you have an Israeli human rights organization saying it's apartheid, it's pretty hard to say that they're anti-Semites. Although, of course, what people like to say about me as well is that we're just self-loathing Jews.
Right.
Yeah. So I did that. I recorded it and went well. Then I was told, like someone came in, a producer came in after we'd filmed it, because we went on to filming the rest of the show, which is doing news segments. And they had the co-host, Robbie, say something that was basically like reiterating what Jonathan Greenblatt had said, which was a little weird, but sometimes they do these pickups. So that was kind of a hint that maybe there was something kind of weird going on. And then I left, we finished filming for the day, and I got a call from the producer.
So, and this doesn't air live?
No, it doesn't air live. Right. Thanks for reminding me to say that. So I got a call from the producer, but they do release them kind of as you're going, because they have a huge staff there. It's not like some rinky dinky thing, so they release them. And so part of the reason the producer called me was she was like, I want you to know that the higher ups decided not to release your segment, your radar. And so you're not going to see it on YouTube. And just so you know, I wanted you to hear from me. And I was like, why? And she said, well, I didn't know this at the time, but we have a policy where we don't do op-eds, written or video, on Israel. And of course, if I'd known this, I would have told you, because the thing is, you submit your radar, your monologue, you email it the night before, and they never check it. They just, because part of the things that they do is they trust the hosts to deliver monologues. And there's no party line. Usually there's no ideological framework. And that's kind of what their shtick is at Rising at the Hill, is that you're allowed to say things outside of the mainstream that you can't say in other media venues.
A lot of what Rising, and I think the reason people, gained popularity is because it was many times willing to go outside of the Overton window. It was outside of what mainstream media would allow usually.
Right. Yeah. So I was told that you couldn't do op-eds on Israel. And so I spent the next couple of days trying to get them to either reconsider or air it, and having someone with an opposing view on afterwards. I was fine with that. And I got a call on Wednesday. This was Monday. And I got a call on Wednesday from the editor-in-chief of The Hill, Bob Cusack, telling me they weren't going to run it. I asked him why. He said, well, we get lots of pitches we pass on, which was just can I curse on this show?
Yeah.
Which was bullshit, because this is not a pitch. This is not some random person submitting an article for the Hill for consideration. This is something, and Ryan Grimm, who did a story on this, said that he did, hundreds of these monologues because he himself used to work at Rising, and there was no oversight, absolutely no editorial oversight. So that was a lie. He said it wasn't in their sweet spot of coverage, which is more domestic than international, which was a lie, because I am someone who have appeared on it over the course of 3 years. Again, every week I did international news, probably at least half the time. And also it's in large part a domestic story, because as we all know, Israel is a special friend of the United States, and Rashida Tlaib is a sitting congresswoman. So I knew that was not true. Now, the producers had told me that the good news was that even though you couldn't do op-eds on Israel, you could do segments on Israel. And not to get too into the weeds, but when I appeared every week as a guest, that was considered a segment. I was either, so when you're a guest, you're doing segments. When you're a host, you're doing either segments or radars. So once I was told they weren't going to run it, I was like, can I talk about the story on my segment? Because it was the next day. I happened to film on Thursdays, so I was going to be filming my segment on Thursdays. And that's when the producers said, you should have gotten an email from Sarah. Sarah's another woman who works, she's an executive. And I can't even remember her last name right now, which lucky for her. I'll find it later so I can, sing her. But
we will email everyone watching right now.
Yeah, exactly. Don't worry. You'll get a follow-up email with her name and social security and address. No, but Sarah said, hi, Katie, we won't be needing you for your segment tomorrow. Please send any unpaid invoices. Feel free to send any unpaid invoices. There's a word for that I'm not going to use on TV or anywhere, but because I don't want to get my feminist bona fides taken away from me. But it was a word with the word Y at the end of it. And what was the last one? We wish you best of luck, which is such a passive aggressive lie. You obviously don't wish me best of luck.
Yeah, it's a passive aggressive saying like, we wish you well, goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was it. And what I did though was I was like, I had reached out to Breakthrough News and Rania Kalik, because not to do an expose and burn them down, but I thought like, well, if they're not going to let me do my radar there, my monologue there, it's a good monologue, it's well researched, so I'll do it with Breakthrough News, and then I'll talk about the story on Rising. The story being the Rashida Tlaib thing, not the story not being how they censored me. But then once they did that, I was like, all right, fuck it. So we did the monologue, and at the top of the monologue, I say, this is a monologue I recorded for The Hill, which was, then they censored, and then I was fired over it. And that did pretty well. But I'm not going to lie, it's frustrating. I mean, they had a huge audience, and I mean, you understand this as well as anyone else, better than most people, that it's a pretty frustrating feeling to be stifled. And being stifled doesn't just mean, literally. I mean, I was stifled by The Hill, but then I feel like I'm a bit stifled, or I lost a big venue. I'll say I lost a big audience by not being at The Hill.
Yeah. And, it's ironic that, ultimately my show at RT were basically destroyed by government sanctions. And my YouTube channel was banned around the world. But I was never censored there, and I never dealt with exactly what you're talking about. Although it seems a little more rare Rising than like MSNBC or something, where they would, of course, vet every word you say. But I was never told what to say, what not to say, nothing. But at many of these other outlets, and especially mainstream media, that type of censorship is constant.
Right. I think it's more insidious in some ways at a place like The Hill, because they pride themselves on it. So when you're watching it, you really have the idea. Like, most people who are at all critical of the media in general understand that all establishment media, all mainstream media censors, whether it's overt or, Crystal Ball talks about this, how she wrote a monologue, or wrote a monologue about Hillary Clinton, and it got so fact-checked, and there was so much pushback on it that she says this herself, like, it was just easier not to do that anymore. Like, people, it's not always overt in red ink, although in this case, I assume it was red ink or whatever, however they but it's not always an explicit don't do this story. It can be you just make life harder for people when they do certain types of stories, and then people out of a sense of like self-preservation or just time management or not wanting to hassle, they just avoid these stories. In this case, I was just told, of course, they lied. I mean, Brianna Joy Gray, to her credit, who still works there, she did kind of publicly agonize over whether or not to stay. I understand why she stayed. She makes good points. That's a big show. So, if you're going to have a big show, it's good to have some good people on it. But she did go to the bat for me behind closed doors, and then she went to the bat for me in front of closed doors. She pushed back big time. They were saying they denied that. They told her, and she said, I'm not blowing up. I'm not, destroying any confidence. Or she said this publicly on her show and on my show. They pretended that the reason they didn't do the monologue was because of stylistic issues as opposed to ideological ones, which literally nobody believed that. Absolutely nobody believed that. Wow. Thanks, Nays Garden.
Yeah. Thanks,
Wow.
Nay.
Very
Very kind of you.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, patreon.com/the Katie Halper Show, just so you know. Or youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show. No, but I'm very glad that you're supporting Lee, because Lee definitely deserves support. And we had you on like right after RT got shut off.
Yeah.
Shut down. Yeah. So because we wanted to make sure to support you. But that was bullshit, and it was nice that Bree defended me on that, because I would have. I mean, it was just important, I think, for people to see that really was the reason. Like, if they're going to fire me over it, then they should be exposed as the party line followers that they are, and not get away with the lie that it was stylistic, which is like nobody who saw that, except for the most dishonest, right-wing Zionists or Peps, could pretend that there's anything untruthful in it. I mean, I think that the only honest way that you push back against the video I did, and there are honest people who do this, is by saying, well, maybe it's apartheid, but it needs to be that. Maybe it's apartheid, but they want to kill all Jews and push us into the sea. You can't. And then people come back. Yeah.
I'm sure some people have that opinion, but they don't like to phrase it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And then, then you have people, well, apartheid, it's racial. It's not about ethnic, about religion. Like, okay, fine. Well, Israel is the country that defines being Jewish, not as just religion. You can have one Jewish grandparent, although this crazy right-wing government is changing it. So I was talking to Miko Pellet, who I believe you've had on your show, or I know he does stuff at Mint Press. But it's getting even worse. It's just ridiculous, because it also, the idea that it doesn't count because it's not black people versus white people, people who are saying it's not racial in the case of Israel-Palestine, the irony is they're actually leaning into race, which is a social construct, and they're implicitly saying that they believe in race as a category, right? And I had on Noura Erakat, who is a human rights lawyer, Palestinian American, who, if anyone doubts that, if anyone wants to see that argument destroyed, I highly recommend this interview that I did with Noura, which you can find at youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show. But it's just infuriating. I mean, I'd like to pretend that I landed. Look, I'm fine. I'm very lucky because I have other shows. I have the Katie Halper Show. I have Useful Idiots, and so that was not my only source of income. But it was a really big audience that I lost, and it was. I'm not gonna lie, it's really fun. Like, something that was great about Rising is that the left doesn't have a lot of money, so we don't have very cool sets or cool production value.
Same with RT, and RT was not exclusively left. Neither was Rising, but there were a few people like me and Chris Hedges and Jesse Ventura and stuff that were able to get really nice sets and high level equipment and everything for our shows. So yeah.
Right. And it's not exclusively left at all. But the point is, if you're on there and you're making a good point as a leftist, it's nice to have high production value.
Right.
And it's rare because, I think that the only way that the left has recently been able, I don't even know recently, maybe for longer, but the only way the real left has been able to get high production value is by being on channels that are not exclusively left, or being on shows like Rising that are explicitly kind of bipartisan or post-partisan. And what Rising does, by the way, for people who don't know, is that I was on as the leftist host, and I was, like
Right.
paired up with Robbie Suave, who's there as the right wing host, or I would, and other times I guest hosted, I was there with Emily, who was on the right wing, who now has left to do the show Counterpoints with Ryan Grimm, but that's their shtick.
I don't normally do this, but I feel like it's a good thing to address. Someone goes, the left doesn't have much money. Is this comedy? And what they're misunderstanding is when we say the left, we do not mean Democrats.
Right.
We mean real, actual left wing.
Yeah, we mean people who criticize the war machine. We mean people who criticize Democrats. I mean, this is an important point. I am glad you highlighted this, because the term left can be a catch-all, and certainly sometimes we'll kind of like say, I mean, this is an important point precisely because the Republicans and Democrats don't represent the right and the left. They represent the right and the center right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a myth that we have these two parts of the political spectrum. But yeah, MSNBC may proclaim to be left, although I don't know how much they can do that when they have a George W. Administration to MSNBC pipeline that they run. I mean, literally, they have so many people who worked for Bush, or it's basically an RNC to MSNBC pipeline. They have that guy, Stephen Schmidt, who worked for McCain. They have William Kristol on, a major neocon, a major architect of the Iraq War. They still claim to be, I guess, it shows that they don't understand left or right, or that their understanding of left and right is also within a right wing.
I think it's, I don't think it's not understanding. I think it's intentional. I think they want Americans to believe this is as left as thought can get.
Right. They want to shift the Overton window to the right, so that these are like this is the Amy Goodman of mainstream news, or although of course Amy Goodman, I just had Vijay Prashad on. We talked about what happened to Democracy Now! Because I don't think, and this is something I disagree with some people on the left. I think some people on the left will cancel entire outlets because there's some problematic coverage. I still say that Democracy Now! Does a lot of important investigation. A lot, like, their headlines are really important. I think their headlines are a great source of news.
I don't disagree with you. And also they were pivotal in kind of waking me up years ago in 2006 and 7 and 8. But I will say it starts to add up, when they're giving in to the kind of State Department talking points about Syria and about various things, Ukraine in many ways, although sometimes they have debates, but you start to eventually, I had to stop watching eventually, because I was like, well, when a third of it I know is factually incorrect, I don't know how much I can trust the other stuff. So.
Right. So we did a thing, I think it's Patreon only, with VJ, where he kind of tries to figure out what happened there, because he's been on the show. But they have this guy Adrian Zen on, who's German, who's like, apparently, I have to look into this, but
I didn't know they had him on. He's an evangelical German who's like the main researcher on the so-called genocide against Uyghurs. And he has said, quote unquote, that Jews will burn in a fiery furnace upon death or the end times or whatever.
Yeah.
And his goal in life is to stop communism. And it's like the idea that this guy is ever taken literally or seriously anyway is bizarre.
Yeah, well, I hope he's not taken literally, because that really sucks for us when the end times come, Lee.
Yeah.
We're screwed. Although, is your mom, I don't even know, is your mom's side of the family Jewish or your dad's side?
Mom's side.
Okay, so you do count. So
I'm official.
You're official. Yeah, you're legit. Of course, just so people know, that's a religious definition of Jewishness. Right. It's not one. Judah Friedlander has this funny joke, because Judah Friedlander is half Jewish. As you can probably guess, it's his dad, Friedlander. And he was on my show. He said this. He was like, when people find out your mom isn't Jewish, they treat you like like you killed their dog or something. They don't consider you Jewish. And he said, but for the Nazis, being Jewish just meant having one Jewish grandparent. So in some ways, Hitler was more accepting of Jews than other Jews.
Judah's pretty great a lot of the time.
He is great. Yeah.
What was I about to say before that fried my brain?
Before the Jewish enough for Hitler joke.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask earlier, I'm sorry to say I was not a regular Rising watcher. Do they ever do anything about Israel, or it's really like
Well,
a
this is what's so
no-go?
this is what's so interesting, because a lot of people, mostly haters of mine, were like, "Oh, Katie just did this to like make a statement. Of course she was going to get fired after she did this. You can't criticize Israel." I had done like so many segments on Israel as a guest, and they're critical of Israel. Now, there is this organization called Honest Reporting, which is an ironic title because they are just smear merchants. They're merchants of smearing.
Oh,
They
so they
try to
just
get
did,
people
they just did
fired.
something. This connects all of us. They just did something that was a Mint Press cartoon about you. So
Oh, great. Okay, cool. So they had gone after me for a segment, and of course these people are just censorious and can't actually debate you on the issue, so they have to smear you. And they can't go after substantive claims, so they just have to smear people. So I know that they did an article about me. I decided not to respond to it because they seem so pathetic and insignificant. And if the Hill caved to that, I mean, that's pretty pathetic. But there also was a very important article that couple things. One is that Low Key, who has a show obviously on Mint Press,
yep.
did a kind of deep dive into all the conflicts of interest between the Hill and Israel. But also Branko Marcetic did a great article at Jacobin. Left-wing journalist Katie Halper has been fired for calling Israel an apartheid state, and he kind of looks into this Nexstar. And Nexstar is a company that bought the Hill. In late August, I'm going to quote from his article. In late August, Nexstar filled the position of deputy managing editor of News Nation, its cable channel, with Jake Novak, a journalist who spent the preceding year and a half as the media director of the Israeli Consulate General in New York. Novak most recently achieved infamy for being embroiled in the Matt Gaetz underage sex controversy, where he appeared to admit to Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams, of all people, that he was involved in the extortion attempt on Getz's rich father in order to funnel millions of dollars to a commando team leader to free a U.S. hostage in Iran. And so Novak was hired by Nexstar, and again, Nexstar bought the Hill. And he's written approvingly of Donald Trump's dropping of U.S. support for the two-state solution. He's advocated for Israel to build more illegal settlements, saying that would make up a hypothetical, saying it would bring more peace, prosperity, and freedom to both Israelis and Arabs. So that's interesting. And Nexstar is pretty shady. I mean, over the 2016 election cycle, the company's PAC gave 80% of its money to GOP affiliated PACs, a number that rose to 100% in the 2018 cycle.
So they had bought the Hill, or bought a portion of the Hill, just before not long before you were fired?
Right. Yeah.
Dude, that lines up perfectly with kind of what happened to me at Huffington Post back in whatever it was, 2008, 2009 or something. I used to write comedy for Huffington Post. For a while, they had paid comedy writers. And so I wrote for them for like a year or two. Then they got rid of all their paid comedy writers because they realized they could make more money by just stealing people's work without paying people. So they started doing that. And I would still submit stuff unpaid occasionally when I just wanted to get 100,000 clicks on something, and so I'd send them stuff. But then the week after, or within days of being sold to AOL Time Warner, they told me they couldn't take one of my pieces. It was the first time they ever told me that. And within the piece, I called Rumsfeld a war criminal. And I emailed and said, is it because I called Rumsfeld a war criminal? And they're like, yeah, that doesn't really fit with our tone.
Wow.
And it was immediately after AOL bought them.
Wow. Yeah. There you go.
Which, if you can't call Rumsfeld a war criminal, what?
I know. You're just literally, I mean, that's just facts. That's not an op-ed. That's not subjective. Yeah.
So in a more general sense, outside of just your experience, do you feel the conversation about Israel is opening up nationally, internationally? Like, you're hearing the words apartheid state thrown around more than 10 years ago, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I do. And that's what's interesting. It's kind of the Overton window almost has shifted, so that Israel stuff is now, it is. I mean, I think Rashida Tlaib is right that it's harder and harder to pretend you're progressive and not be critical of Israel. Now, that's reflected on the ground. And you do have, some people at MSNBC, Mehdi Hassan, who I don't always agree with, but he's very good on this issue. You do see some of that trickling up, I guess, into mainstream media, but mostly you see this on the ground, and it's not reflected in the government. It's reflected among some people, like Rashida Tlaib. I mean, AOC did this weird thing where she like voted present for the Iron Dome and was crying. I think she got like politically threatened probably by Mama Bear. There were probably a lot of angry like right-wing Zionists who were also mad at her. Right. I don't really understand what happened there. That was kind of a weird moment. But I think Ilhan Omar, of course, has been critical. And I went on Fox News like you did when you slammed Fox News. I went on Fox News to defend Ilhan Omar. So I said,
what show was this?
Laura Ingram's. It was great. I clipped it and it did really well, actually. So that got a lot of attention because you had these people trying to go-explain to me what anti-Semitism was. And one of the
guests, go-explain?
Yeah, go-explain, yeah. Which is just so funny because one of the guys who was Matt Schlapp, I believe is his name, and he's some like right-wing Christian who of course wants, well, he may be Catholic actually, in which case he may not expect all of us to go back to Israel and burn in eternity. Although there are 400 of us or something who get out. 400 of us, yeah. Is
that just the richest ones, or?
I don't know. I think it's maybe those are how many are allowed to accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. I'm not sure how it works, but there's a limited number of seats.
That's if you have to buy Donald Trump's trading cards, and then
probably, yeah, it may be NFT related. But this guy was part of was affiliated with the Trump administration, and of course Trump famously said, this guy is going to lecture me about anti-Semitism when Trump said that I'm sure there are fine people on both sides of Charlottesville.
Right.
Yeah. And I was like, why don't you condemn Trump's why don't you condemn Trump for that? Why don't you speak out against that if you are so critical of anti-Semitism? He didn't really have anything to say about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised Fox News didn't do their research, but
yeah, I know, shocking, right?
I'm going to ask you something that I often get, which is why does it seem like a lot of people that are fans of mine, fans of yours, fans of Jimmy Dore's, a few others, say why are we having to go to comedians for the truth?
Right.
Why have comedians? I mean, granted, it's only a handful of us, but or a dozen or something. But why have comedians become these truth tellers in a way that you don't see coming from that many journalists? I guess.
Right. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that it's the system that comedians come up in. We don't come up in the way of I have to please the boss. So we're not generally, I mean, some are, but we're not generally thinking, well, what can I say that will be allowed, that will get me promoted at CNN or MSNBC, that will further me up that ladder. So I think that's part of it, the independent side. And then the other thing is just, I mean, as a comedian, and, I started as a completely apolitical comedian, just Seinfeldian little observations.
What's the deal?
What's the deal with this? You kind of hyper analyze everything. And so I feel like when you set yourself on that path, I didn't know at the time, you hyper analyze everything, and then you start hyper analyzing the news, and then you start seeing all these cracks in everything that you thought was the norm, MSNBC talking points and stuff, and it all falls apart. It's like a house of cards, and I don't know. So I feel like those are maybe the two bigger reasons.
Yeah, you do start looking at, like, if you analyze things and you look at things with a critical eye, or you look at language, that's always kind of a fun thing to do. Or you just see the irony in things, or you see the comedy in things that, like, but it's like you want to laugh instead of cry.
And willing to say things that could hurt careers. I know you talked about how you didn't exactly know you were doing anything that was going to get you fired, but
but I could have shut up right after, right? That is what I could have just been like, okay, cool. So you're not going to run it. Awesome. See you on Thursday.
Right. And you also chose to amplify Tara Reid when nobody else was
Right,
doing it.
Tara Reid. Yeah, and I know you've had her on, which is thank you
Sorry,
for doing that.
Tara.
That's good. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
I
yeah. I mean,
hear
yeah.
you.
After you got the ball rolling, I
Yeah.
then started interacting with her and have talked to her. But so many people were afraid to do that. I didn't know it at the time. I mean, I had to be educated on it. But so many people were afraid to do that because they were like, "Oh, this is a third rail. This will get me screwed."
Right. Right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of things that are third rails that I think that, I think maybe also it is that, like, once you are willing to touch the third rail on some things, it becomes easier. But also, to be honest, it also is like I feel like I sometimes have to be selective because I don't wanna touch I have to touch the third rails that I really care about or that I really believe in.
Yeah. You're trying not to grab too many third rails.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't have enough arms. Yeah.
What I don't think I've ever asked you this. What comedians inspired you?
Um what's funny is that I really did love Colbert and Stewart, but especially Colbert because he was always like Stewart could kind of go in and out of being political or in and out of having an ideology, but Colbert was always ideological. Like he couldn't say a single thing without being ideological because he was a parody character. So
Right.
everything he was doing was making fun of the right wing. And he was so much funnier when he was at the Colbert Report than he is now.
So much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I did find it kind of shocking. I was a huge Colbert fan as well of the Colbert Report. I did find it kind of shocking that he claims to not really know of the influence exactly that he was having. And when he went and did the famous Bush's
Yeah.
correspondence dinner and obliterated Bush, and
Yeah.
everyone goes, "Oh my God, Colbert did it." He claims, and I knew one of his producers at the time, and he said it was the truth, that Colbert thought he was doing his job. He thought he was there to make people laugh and be a faux right winger, and he didn't realize that he was going beyond what was allowable.
How is that possible though? He included Helen Thomas. I mean, Helen Thomas famously was smeared as an anti-Semite when she was the only person. She was happened to be Lebanese American. She was the only person who had a slight sympathy towards Palestinians, as opposed to every single other person in the media who's loyal. Oh, I'm gonna get called an anti-Semite. I was gonna say loyalty, allegiance. Uh, who leaned pro quote unquote pro Israel. He had to know that that was going to get him into some trouble. He even defended her on his show. He went, one of the best segments he did ever was he did this thing called Formidable Opponent, where it was like Colbert versus Colbert. And he talked about the flotilla, and it was really funny and really informative. And he had Michael Oren on, the American ambassador to Israel, and he went after him for the blockade on Gaza and talked about, so wait, let me get this right. So lettuce is dangerous, cardamom is dangerous, all these things that were on their list, cinnamon, whatever. It was very, very, very courageous. And I do think he had some kind of just basic decency. And if you have basic decency, you do see how ridiculous the Israeli government is. I mean, just like you see how ridiculous the US government is when you have that. But I want to point out something, which is that, people, this anti-Semitic trope suggesting a dual loyalty is actually one that's peddled by people who claim to battle anti-Semitism, like AIPAC and the ADL. They're the ones who suggest that Jews are a monolith and Jews all blindly support Israel. They wouldn't say blindly, but Jews all support Israel. They're the ones who conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And that's really based on the anti-Semitic idea that all Jews have one position on Israel. I mean, it's just so ironic that this is an anti-Semitic trope that they accuse, Ilhan Omar of spreading. She doesn't think that about American Jews. She doesn't think that we're mostly loyal to Israel. She used a word once that, and of course, most Zionists are Christian. That's another thing, which is ironic.
Well, and calling, you or me anti-Semitic for criticizing Israel, or really anyone, it dilutes what anti-Semitism really is.
Also
and
really
so it actually creates more of it, or creates a window where more of it can exist, because the word stops meaning anything.
Right, it trivializes it. Yeah.
The
Yeah,
way
exactly.
it was thrown around against Jeremy Corbyn, just used as a weapon.
Right. And then when there is actual anti-Semitism, it's harder to take those allegations seriously, because all these things that are not anti-Semitism are called anti-Semitism, and there is real anti-Semitism. And Ali Abu Nima from Electronic Intifada talks about this, how the ADL tries to both sides anti-Semitism.
Anti-Defamation League.
The Anti-Defamation League, yeah. So they try to both sides anti-Semitism. So they say, well, on the right we have people who are shooting up synagogues, but on the left we have people who support BDS. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? That's anti-Semitism, supporting BDS, supporting a non-violent boycott, divest, sanction of Israel. It's not anti-Semitic. It's picking on Israel. It's not picking on Jews. And Israel, again, these same people who are pretend to be friends of Israel, they're the ones who are highlighting, all American politicians almost highlight the special relationship with Israel. Some people are like, why are you picking on Israel? Well, we have a special relationship with them. We fund the hell out of them.
Right.
They claim to be this democracy in a sea of backwards barbarity, and we claim the same thing. And then they, at the same time, they don't have a democracy. And what's fascinating is you have people like Ben Gvir, Itamar Ben Gvir, who is this rabid racist Israeli who's going to be part of Netanyahu's cabinet, who is a follower of Meir Kahane. He is, who was a rabid right-wing anti-Muslim terrorist, basically. You have one of his spokesmen said to an NBC reporter, the NBC reporter was commenting on some of their basically proposed ethnic cleansing plans, and said, is this really democracy? And this guy says, well, Israel wasn't really founded as a democracy. It was first and foremost founded as a Jewish state. And you can't. He's saying the quiet part out loud,
right? That it's a Jewish state.
Yeah,
I mean, it is on the flag.
That is true, right? And that's another interesting thing, is that Israel really prides itself in being this secular, enlightened state, and yet you can't even get married without an Orthodox rabbi.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and you can't convert. You have to have an Orthodox conversion. And they really, talking about both sides and having it both ways, they really do like to do that.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back a little. You and I both were, back when we used to do Laughing Liberally and stuff, you and I both were very supportive of Obama's 2008 campaign. And it really, for me, that was the final wake-up call, was seeing how he behaved and that he was no different.
Right.
And I was younger then.
Right.
Seeing that he was no different, he wasn't going to actually serve the people. He was dropping as many bombs as Bush did, and destroying the environment equivalently and everything. And so I'm wondering what your wake up process was, to see that these two parties are not really two parties. I mean, you may have some outliers. There are some outliers, but for the most part, they agree on 80 to 90% of our nation.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was always left, like more left. I just didn't see a viable left, and people are going to probably shit on me for this. Well, there's Occupy Wall Street, which I feel like you were actually fairly involved with. Occupy Wall Street I supported, but it didn't resonate with me, if that makes sense. What really resonated with me was Bernie Sanders.
Because you don't like sleeping bags.
I don't like sleeping bags, actually. I don't like camping. So it was only going to go so far for me. And I don't love drum circles either. But Bernie Sanders, I think, was just a wake-up call to how it exposed so many. Well, there are a couple things. One is that we got Obama as president. And to be fair, I never thought he would be amazing. I thought he'd be better than he was, though.
Yeah.
And I was never that excited about him, though. I actually really didn't like his purple America, blue state, red state, purple America shit.
Yeah.
And because he didn't make it post-partisan, it was kind of about meeting in the middle, is how I saw it. And of course, he did basically do that. Trying to be as centrist as possible. And of course, he undermined the anti-war movement because we had Obama. We didn't have to worry about it. And I spent and there was so much racism towards him also. So he became a more sympathetic figure.
Right. And he made it, as with Clinton, he made it normal for Democrats as well as Republicans but made it normal for Democrats to be just endless war, environmental, big oil destruction, big oil, environmental destruction. He made all that normal for Democrats. Now Clinton did as well, but
yeah, we can't deny. We have to give Clinton credit for being a real trailblazer. But I think with Bernie, what happened was all these people who claim to be like me, who claim to be leftists, but okay, we live in this two-party system. And of course, if we had a better option, we'd line up behind that option and support that option. When we had Bernie and when he was viable and when we realized how popular Medicare for all was and that it was a fringe issue only among elites and among media elites, which is what made it seem like a fringe issue in the first place. When people didn't line up behind him or rally around him or whatever you want to say, it was like, oh, these people are absolutely full of shit. Like they are totally full of shit and they're not actual leftists. And that to me, it really was a line in the sand. Now you can criticize Bernie and you were more critical of him than I was, and you were right. I mean, although I don't really think it's not that I don't think I was wrong. I mean, you weren't
the first time around after he did his whole Clinton endorsement tour, that was kind of I was done with him at that point. But before that, in his 2016 run, I wasn't endorsing anyone, but I talked very positively about everything Bernie was doing. Essentially, I just said, but you watch, this will be rigged against him. And I was like, I know enough about the system. I know enough about these primaries and I calculated, covered and really went piece by piece through how it was being rigged against him. And sure enough, it was exactly that. So it wasn't that I was just more cynical. It wasn't that I thought that he was garbage.
Of course.
You just knew they will never let him be president.
And so, but it's interesting because Bernie is, Jack Allison from Struggle Session likes to say, like, ultimately he was a Democrat. He was even a Democrat because, a lot of his enemies would be like, he's not even a Democrat. It's like, sadly, he was even a Democrat. He was a Democrat. I think, though, that woke me up to, even though he was obviously working within the two-party system, I just feel like that was a general wake-up call to the full of shitness of everything. Even though you could say, well, you should have been, if you were really hip to how it worked, then you should have understood. I can't believe I just said hip to how it worked. Like, what's less hip than the expression hip to? But if you were aware of how it worked, you'd of course be critical of Bernie. And I was. And look, he exists in the two-party system and he's not the anti-imperialist I would like him to be. And he did, endorse, forget Hillary. He endorsed Biden way too quickly without getting any concessions. Concessions. That was really disturbing.
But it was also so odd after it had been completely rigged against him the first time around that he just went into the next one exactly the same as if.
I know. He needed a better battle plan.
Let him do it.
Yeah, he needed a better battle plan. Now, maybe he really just thought he was going to push the issues. And he did to a certain extent. But then again, at the end of the day, we don't have Medicare for all. I mean, I don't know.
That's the thing. Like, he got one of his big big concessions was to help make the platform for the DNC. That platform doesn't matter. They don't care what that platform said.
Yeah. Ridiculous. So, but I guess it was just it was a wake up call to how watching the Democrats sabotage him was a reminder of how terrible the Democrats are. It created this division, I think, it really brought out the left versus liberal, that thing we were talking about at the beginning of the show. It was no longer people who I thought would get excited by the leftists once there was an actual leftist there. It was people who just like either their politics sucked or they were taken up by this weird like parasocial relationship with Hillary Clinton, or they were like self-absorbed enough to see her journey resonate with them. And they cared more about one powerful, privileged, entitled woman's journey than they cared about the lives of countless less powerful women. Because, of course, Bernie Sanders was someone whose policies were good for women. I mean, he was less of a hawk than Hillary Clinton. War is pretty bad for women. He supported the fight for 15. The majority of minimum wage earners are women. You know, what did Hillary say? She gave a speech saying women's rights are human rights. Great. That's awesome. I mean, I couldn't care less. And her policies, you know, are breaking up the banks going to end racism? No. Okay. That was the most cynical, disgusting thing because one, no one was saying breaking up the banks was going to end racism, but also you can't pretend that the housing crisis wasn't racialized. So was it going to end racism? No. Would things like breaking up banks help ameliorate some problems that disproportionately impact people of color? Yes.
So far in these past 2 years, what rating would you give Biden? A plus or A plus plus?
That's like when Stephen Colbert used to say, Bush, best president or best president ever? Yeah. I mean, I think Biden sucks. I think that like one thing I will say about Bernie is maybe he made it easier for people to be less complacent about Biden. Now, I don't know what effect that has on the ground. I don't think we have a strong anti-war movement. But I do
or almost any.
Yeah, right. We don't really have any. I do think that like I don't know. What has he done?
The US has moved to a place where it's like endless war without declaring war. So it's almost it's so, I mean,
under the radar almost.
It's like AFRICOM doesn't get any coverage and we have 36 named operations going on in Africa.
People don't know what AFRICOM is.
Yeah, people don't even know what this stuff is. So it's like, how can you have an anti-war movement when most people don't know what the war is?
Right. It's true. Yeah. And the Ukraine stuff, as you guys have covered well, I mean, is just, and Alan McLeod does great work on this, you know, your press colleague. I mean, that is just like, that's something that's extremely infuriating because
Do you get in arguments with family members over Ukraine?
Not, so my parents are pretty, extended family. Yes, I do. But, my parents are pretty good on this stuff. My mom, especially, she'll sometimes send out like mass texts to people. I'm like, why are you doing this? She sent out Chris Hedges, which was great. That article he wrote early on, which is like, what was it? Basically was saying it was like unjustified, but, it was predictable. He was saying it was a totally predictable and preventable war. And she sent it out to like 12 people on text. And of course, a big fight broke out. And like, you know, it's like, Mom, you can't do that. If you want to do that, at least do it on email so people don't get these like, you know, aggressive texts. But, you know, if people cared about the lives of Ukrainians, and I think what's sad about this is that you have a combination of bad faith people who want a proxy war to continue because they want to weaken Russia and they want, you know, sales for the arms industry to do well. And then you have good faith people who just hear the PR and really think that Putin is a Hitler and we have to defend Ukrainians and that what we're doing is for the sake of civilians. And of course, if you know anything about the way that this war broke out, you know anything about the way that it was preventable, that it was provoked, or you just look at the way that Boris Johnson, and clearly he doesn't do anything without the US is okay, but Boris Johnson told Zelensky not to negotiate with Putin. If you look at the way the United States, back in April, if you care about Ukrainian lives, you want this war to come to an end. And the fact that they prioritize extending the war should tell you everything you need to know about whether or not the lives of Ukrainians is what's actually important.
Yeah. That's the thing I found most infuriating is it's like the people claiming to care about Ukrainian lives are actually supporting the side that is essentially saying, just keep this going forever.
Yeah, they're extending the war. And it is frustrating because it's like people's empathy is being, and ignorance is being preyed on. And, you know, of course, then there's the other thing about, well, where are your Palestinian flags? I mean, that's something that the United States has a direct hand in. But
or your Yemen flags.
Or your Yemen flags, right. Yeah. I mean, so, and it's also frustrating because it's hard to explain. You have to really sit someone down and be like, okay, here's the history of Russia and the United States, the Soviet Union, starting at the fall of the Soviet Union. Here are the promises we made. Here's what NATO really does. It's not an easy narrative. But I think that the Hitlerification of Putin is extremely dangerous because the takeaway from that, and you see people saying this out loud, he's worse than Hitler. You see Michael McFaul saying this on
Right.
MSNBC and saying that Hitler at least didn't kill, what did he say? Like, didn't kill
No,
German
Rachel Maddow's own Twitter said at
Yes.
least Hitler didn't kill his own people or
Like, he
something like
didn't
that.
kill German-speaking
Germans.
Germans,
He did.
or ethnic
He didn't kill Germans, which is acting like Jews weren't
We're
German.
not Germans. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was insane. But the real takeaway of the Hitlerification of Putin is that you can't negotiate, right? Because the takeaway from World War II is that we were naive, or Neville Chamberlain was naive. Now, I actually talked about this with Jeffrey Sachs on my show, and this is kind of I probably shouldn't say this, but the truth is, you do try to negotiate first. That's not the problem. It's just that then if it doesn't work, you can't negotiate. But the reason people love saying that is because they want it to look like sitting down with Putin is an impossibility.
Right.
And that's very dangerous, because obviously all wars end through negotiation.
Yep. At some point.
Yeah. So it's just a question of how many people are going to die before that happens.
Yeah, and the U.S. is fine with fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian in this proxy war. And I always remind people, I mean, there's been several, but I always remind people that even former CIA director Leon Panetta has said this is a proxy war.
Right. And the head of William Burns, who's the head of the CIA now, had said, we know from WikiLeaks, like, we can't do these things. Like, we can't have him feel like NATO's on the border, all these things that could have been prevented. And you don't have to like Putin, but I'm sorry, he's not a Hitler. He's not.
No, he's you can say you're opposed to the invasion, as I am, because I'm anti-war, but he's doing something very strategic for Russian security. Like,
I mean, and I don't like he leans into homophobia. I think that's awful. Like, but again, I just don't want dead Ukrainians. Like, and he's not an irrational actor. You can disagree with him on a lot of things and still know that the way that you end wars is by bringing people to the table. And people are like, he's a bully. I'm like, okay, he's a bully on what? What do you want to do about it? Let him bully more?
As if the U.S. doesn't bully people.
I know. That's our lane. That's our lane.
Exactly.
I think we're feeling we're triggered. We're feeling insecure. Yeah.
In these last 5 minutes, do you have any predictions for this coming 2 years of nonstop presidential campaigning garbage?
Oh my God, no, I have no idea. What do you think? You think anyone's going to challenge him?
Challenge Trump, you mean?
Oh, I meant Biden.
Oh, Biden. I think the Democratic Party behind closed doors will decide whether he is even cognitively capable of running again, which so far it seems like they are sticking with him.
Right. Yeah.
And then with the Trump thing, I think Trump has, by the mainstream media propping up Trump for so many years and just covering him endlessly, they have now created this space for a far more capable fascist to defeat Trump, like DeSantis,
right? Yeah.
And I think whoever that person is, probably that beats Trump in the primary, will probably wipe the floor with Biden.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time.
Excited for it?
Very excited. Getting very, very, very excited. Yeah. It's really so disturbing.
Ridiculously.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I really appreciate having you on here. Thanks for chatting with me. And
of course.
I hope you keep doing great work, and we get to talk
again and you too.
Soon. Remind people where to follow your stuff.
At youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show. You can get extended exclusive content at patreon.com/the Katie Halper Show. We have some really great content there. Extended interview with Vijay Prashad, where he talks about democracy now. What else? KT Halps on Twitter and Instagram. That's letter K, letter T, HALPS. Also Useful Idiots and usefulidiots.substack.com. Please do subscribe. It's a free way to support my work. Just subscribe to youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show. Catch it live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. EST. I'm also on Callin, so that's a fun way to interact. I think that's about it, right?
Cool. Thanks a lot, Katie.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. All right, everybody, that's Katie Halper. Thank you so much for joining us. So, as with Katie's work, we are completely independent. This is a Mint Press project, but it's funded by people like you. So please join at patreon.com/behind the headlines. Join up there. You can also find all of this and hopefully you'll subscribe at youtube.com/behind the headlines. Behind the Headlines is the video platform that Mint Press has created. So that's what that name is, if you were wondering. So yeah, I hope you'll hit subscribe and hit the bell so that you find out about these. I do 2 interviews a week. Tomorrow, assuming no glitches, no problems arise, I will be showing it's the first time it will be airing my live interview with John Shipton, Julian Assange's father. And I will, after that, be talking live to Kevin Gosztola, the reporter who has covered Assange every single day. He's done it immensely well, if that's an expression. And he's been in the court many times. So first half will be John Shipton, Julian Assange's father. Second half will be Kevin Gosztola. So that will be tomorrow, Friday at noon Eastern. So come join me then, youtube.com/behind the headlines. And I will see you soon. Keep fighting.